The dog hit the emergency wing at full speed. 105 pounds of Belgian Malinois, military-trained, battle-tested, a blur of muscle and instinct moving through St. Gabriel Medical Center like a storm that had finally broken loose. The security latch on the lower-level kennel had failed. Nobody knew exactly how. 1 second the dog was secured. The next, alarms were sounding through the corridor. Nurses jumped away from medication carts. A supply trolley crashed into the wall. A patient transport aide abandoned his wheelchair and ran. Someone shouted for security. Someone else shouted for animal control. The panic spread faster than the dog ever could. Titan ignored all of it. He wasn't attacking anyone. He wasn't chasing anyone. But fear doesn't stop to ask questions. Fear fills in the blanks itself. Hospital staff scattered in every direction. A security guard reached for his radio with shaking hands while backing behind the nurse's station. 2 orderlies pressed themselves against the wall beside the trauma bay doors. Somewhere behind a privacy curtain, a woman screamed. Through the confusion, through the noise, through dozens of frightened faces, the military dog kept moving with a single purpose that nobody understood. Then he stopped. At the far end of the corridor stood a nurse beside a medication cart. She hadn't run. She hadn't shouted. She wasn't reaching for anything. Aurora Hayes simply stood there watching the dog approach. 32 years old. Brown hair tied into a loose ponytail. Calm gray eyes fixed on the animal moving toward her. Around her, people were yelling warnings. Security officers were ordering her to move. Aurora ignored every one of them. Slowly, carefully, she crouched down. The dog was trembling now. Not with aggression. Not with anger. Something deeper. Something wounded. Aurora tilted her head slightly. "Easy, Titan," she whispered. The effect was immediate. The dog's ears dropped. His body froze. Every ounce of tension seemed to drain from him at once. A second later, the massive military canine lowered his head and pressed his scarred muzzle against Aurora's knee like he had finally found the one person he'd been searching for. The entire corridor fell silent. Doctors stared. Nurses stared. Security stared. Nobody understood how a quiet ER nurse in a small Colorado hospital knew the name of a classified military working dog. And nobody could have guessed that within 24 hours, that single whispered name would expose secrets powerful people had spent years trying to bury. Snow clouds hung low over Cedar Ridge, Colorado, pressing the afternoon light into a pale gray haze. Outside St. Gabriel Medical Center, pine trees bent under the cold wind, and the hospital windows glowed like small lanterns against the coming storm. The dog hit the emergency wing doors with the force of a battering ram. 105 pounds of Belgian Malinois burst through the corridor in a blur of muscle, fear, and training that had been sharpened by years of war and then locked too long behind steel. His name was Titan, though almost no one in that hospital knew it yet. He was 7 years old, broad-chested, dark-muzzled, with amber eyes that seemed too intelligent to belong to an animal and too wounded to belong to a weapon. A torn military harness hung crooked across his shoulders, one buckle snapped, one strap dragging beneath him like the broken leash of a ghost. Scars crossed his muzzle, and one ear stood slightly uneven. Evidence of old violence survived rather than forgotten. He was not attacking anyone, but the emergency wing did not wait to understand that. Panic rose first. It always did. A metal tray crashed to the floor. A supply cart spun sideways and struck the wall hard enough to scatter bandages across the tiles. A young orderly named Peter Dawson, a skinny 23-year-old with red hair, freckles, and a nervous habit of apologizing even when no one blamed him, stumbled backward and knocked over an 4-pole. Somewhere behind a curtain, an elderly woman screamed. Nurses scattered. Patients cried out. A security guard reached for his radio with hands that betrayed him before his voice did. "Code animal. Lower level breach. We need containment." His name was Dale Mercer, 46, thick-waisted, bald on top with a gray horseshoe of hair around his ears, a man who had spent most of his career checking visitor badges and breaking up parking lot arguments. He was not cowardly, not truly, but courage is easier when the threat has a name one understands. This threat had teeth, military training, and eyes full of thunder. Titan moved past all of them as though they were furniture in a burning room. He did not lunge at Peter. He did not chase the screaming patient. He did not snap at Dale. His paws hammered the polished floor, claws skidding slightly at each turn, but his focus never shifted. He was searching. That became clear only later, when everyone had time to breathe and feel embarrassed by the shapes fear had made them take. In that moment, all they saw was a military working dog loose inside a civilian hospital, and a civilian hospital suddenly discovering how thin its rules were when something wild came through the doors. At the far end of the corridor, beside the medication cart, stood Aurora Hayes. She was 32 years old, though exhaustion sometimes made her look older in the blue-white hospital light. She had soft brown hair pulled back into a low ponytail, a few loose strands framing a face that was more striking for its stillness than its beauty. Her skin was fair but weathered slightly around the eyes, as if wind, grief, and sleepless nights had all taken turns leaving their fingerprints there. Her eyes were gray, not cold, but steady in a way people either trusted immediately or found unsettling. She was of average height, slender but not fragile, with the lean strength of someone who had carried more than charts and medication trays in her life. Her scrubs were a muted navy, a size too loose at the shoulders, and the badge clipped to her pocket read, Aurora Hayes, RN. To most of the staff at St. Gabriel, that badge was all she was, a competent emergency nurse, quiet, punctual, useful, forgettable. That was how she preferred it. Forgettable people were left alone. Forgotten people survived. Aurora did not run. She did not reach for a chair or a pole or a sedative syringe. She stood with one hand resting lightly on the medication cart and watched Titan come toward her. Inside her chest, something old opened its eyes. Not fear. Fear had visited her often enough that it no longer needed to knock. This was recognition, and recognition was worse. It carried memory with it. Sand under boots, rotor blades in the dark, a man shouting for a medic, a dog pressed against her side, while the world burned orange beyond a shattered wall. She had spent years burying those images under ordinary things. Pill counts, shift schedules, coffee in paper cups, polite nods to co-workers who never asked the right questions. Now the past came running down the corridor on four legs, scarred and trembling, and all her careful silence cracked down the middle. Around her, voices blurred. "Aurora, move," someone shouted. It might have been Danica Moore, the charge nurse, a tall black woman in her early 40s with braided hair pulled into a tight bun and the sharp, protective gaze of someone who had raised two sons and managed 3 trauma bays with equal authority. Danica was one of the few people who had ever noticed that Aurora's calm was not the calm of innocence. It was the calm of experience. "Get back," Dale shouted. "Don't touch him." But Aurora lowered herself slowly into a crouch. Titan stopped 6 feet from her. His chest heaved. A low sound vibrated in his throat, not quite a growl, not quite a whine. His body was coiled, ready to break in any direction, yet his eyes remained locked on her face. Aurora could see how close he was to losing the last thread of control. His pupils were wide. His mouth was open but dry at the edges. One paw lifted and set down again, a tiny uncertain motion that struck her with unexpected tenderness. For all his size, for all his training, for all the fear he had caused, he looked suddenly like a lost creature standing at the gates of a world that no longer had a place for him. Aurora's throat tightened. She had promised herself 100 times that she would not speak the old names aloud. Names were doors. Once opened, they rarely closed properly. But Titan was shaking, and promises made to pain often outranked promises made to safety. She leaned forward just enough for him to hear her above the chaos and whispered, "Easy, Titan. I'm here." The change was immediate and so complete that the corridor seemed to lose gravity. Titan's ears dropped. The hard line of his back softened. The breath that tore through him came out in one long shudder. Then he stepped forward, slowly now, every movement careful, and lowered his massive head against Aurora's knee. His scarred muzzle pressed into her scrubs. His eyes closed. The mighty war dog, the animal that had sent an entire emergency wing into panic, folded himself toward a quiet nurse, as if she were the only solid thing left in the world. Aurora placed one hand between his shoulder blades, palm flat, pressure steady, not restraining, anchoring, the way one holds a soul at the edge of a cliff and reminds it that falling is not the only option. For several seconds, no one moved. Even the monitors seemed quieter. Peter Dawson stood frozen, with one hand still gripping the fallen 4-pole. Dale Mercer's radio crackled uselessly at his shoulder. Danica stared at Aurora with a dawning confusion that looked almost like fear, but not fear of the dog. Fear of the question that had just entered the room. What did she call him? Someone whispered. How did she know his name? No one answered. Aurora kept her eyes on Titan. She felt the tremor in his body fade by degrees. The old rhythm returned to her without permission. Count the breaths, read the muscles, listen beneath the noise. Titan had always carried stress in his left shoulder first. She remembered that and hated that she remembered it so easily. 7 years could vanish in one touch. She scratched gently behind his right ear, exactly where the fur grew slightly thicker near an old scar. His tail moved once, weak but certain. The gesture nearly undid her. You found me, she murmured, so softly only the dog could hear. But perhaps dogs hear the things human beings spend their lives hiding. Titan pressed closer. The spell broke when the elevator doors opened at the end of the hall and Richard Holloway stepped out. He was 54, tall, angular, and carefully groomed, with iron-gray hair combed back from a high forehead and a narrow face that might once have been handsome before ambition sharpened it into something less human. His suits were always expensive and always dark, as if he believed authority wore navy or charcoal and smelled faintly of cedar aftershave. He had been director of St. Gabriel Medical Center for 5 years, and in that time he had built a reputation for efficiency, discipline, and quiet cruelty disguised as policy. He rarely raised his voice because he had learned that fear traveled farther when spoken softly. Some people respected him. Many obeyed him. Almost no one trusted him. Holloway saw the overturned cart, the frozen staff, the security guard half hidden behind the desk, and finally Aurora crouched on the floor with her hand on a military dog. His expression did not show surprise for long. Surprise was inefficient. It became calculation almost instantly. What is happening here? Holloway asked. His voice was low, controlled, and cold enough to make several nurses straighten as though touched by winter. Dale Mercer moved forward, grateful to have a human authority figure to answer to. Sir, the military dog breached containment from the lower-level kennel. We were trying to secure him, but Nurse Hayes what? Holloway's eyes narrowed. Aurora did not look up. Titan's breathing had slowed, but the corridor remained too charged. One wrong movement, one sharp command, and the dog might rise again into the storm. She calmed him. Danica said before Dale could twist himself into a safer version of the truth. Holloway looked at her. Danica did not flinch, though her jaw tightened. He was escalating, she continued. Aurora stopped it. Aurora is not a military handler, Holloway said. Nor is she authorized to interact with a federal working animal. Aurora finally lifted her gaze. If I had not interacted with him, someone would have been hurt. Holloway's mouth formed something almost like a smile, the sort men like him use when they believe a subordinate has made the generous mistake of answering honestly. That is not your determination to make. The sentence landed in Aurora with familiar weight. Not because of Holloway himself. Men like him were not rare. They appeared in different uniforms, different offices, different boardrooms, all speaking variations of the same belief, that authority mattered more than truth, and obedience mattered more than judgment. Aurora had survived worse men than Richard Holloway, but survival leaves strange habits. One of hers was stillness. When threatened, she did not argue first. She measured. Exits, witnesses, tone, risk. Here there were 2 exits behind Holloway, one to the trauma bay, one toward imaging. Dale was frightened, but not malicious. Danica was watching closely. Titan was still pressed to her knee, and his trust was now the most dangerous thing in the hallway. His name is Titan, Aurora said quietly. He is overstimulated, sleep-deprived, and separated from his handler. He needs calm, space, and a familiar point of contact. Holloway's eyes sharpened at the name. How do you know that? Aurora held his gaze for 1 second too long. Because he told us, she said. It was a terrible answer, and she knew it. Danica's eyebrows rose slightly. Somewhere behind her, Peter whispered, "Dogs can't talk," then seemed immediately ashamed of contributing that particular thought to the crisis. Holloway stepped closer. Titan's head lifted. The dog did not growl, but his body changed. Aurora felt it under her palm. The tightening, the warning, the old protective instinct sparking awake. Holloway noticed too, and for the first time a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. It vanished quickly, buried under irritation. "Remove the nurse," he said to Dale. "Secure the animal." Dale swallowed. "Sir, with respect, he's calm right now." "Then this is the best moment to secure him. If they rush him, he'll panic again," Aurora said. Holloway's eyes cut back to her. "Ms. Hayes, you are a registered nurse in my emergency department, not an advisor to the United States military. Today, I am the person keeping him from hurting someone." A small sound moved through the staff. Not quite a gasp. Not quite approval. The room had discovered a forbidden pleasure. Someone had contradicted Richard Holloway in public and survived the first 3 seconds afterward. Holloway's face hardened. "Stand up. Step away from the dog." Aurora looked down at Titan. His amber eyes followed her face with absolute devotion, and that was the cruelest part. He trusted her to know what came next. He had trusted her once before in places where wrong choices cost blood. She leaned close enough that her loose hair brushed his ear. "Stay," she whispered. "Easy." Then she slowly removed her hand and rose. Titan remained still for half a second. Then his ears flattened. His muscles bunched. A tremor ran from his shoulders to his hind legs. Dale signaled 2 younger security officers forward. One of them, Mark Ellison, was 28, broad-shouldered, blonde, and too eager to prove that he was not afraid. The other, Luis Ortega, 35, compact and dark-eyed, moved more carefully, his face showing the grave common sense of a man who understood that bravery and stupidity often wore the same boots. Mark held a catch pole. Aurora's stomach clenched. "Don't use that," she said. Holloway ignored her. "Proceed." Mark took 1 step. Titan exploded sideways. He did not attack, but his body hit the wall hard enough to rattle the medication cart. The catch pole clanged against the floor. Mark cursed and stumbled back. Luis grabbed him by the sleeve and pulled him out of reach. Patients screamed again. Dale shouted into his radio. Danica moved between 2 frightened interns and the chaos with the instinct of a mother bear in scrubs. Aurora stepped forward without thinking, but Holloway's hand came up like a gate. "You are done," he said. "You have already interfered enough. He's going to hurt himself. That animal is not your responsibility." The words struck deeper than he intended. Aurora felt something in her chest fold inward. Not your responsibility. How many times had she told herself that? Not the old unit. Not the sealed records. Not the dead. Not the dogs. Not the men who woke up screaming. Not the young medics who never came home. She had come to Cedar Ridge to build a small life out of things that did not explode. A rented house at the edge of town. A kettle that whistled too loudly. A porch where snow gathered in soft, harmless drifts. A hospital badge. A name that was not classified. She had asked for so little from the world. Anonymity, work, and enough peace to sleep 4 hours without hearing rotor blades. Yet here was Titan, trembling against a hospital wall, and every buried oath in her was rising. Before Aurora could speak, a new voice entered from behind Holloway. "Director, the military liaison has been notified." The speaker was Claire Whitman, Holloway's administrative coordinator, a thin woman in her late 30s with pale blonde hair cut neatly at her chin and anxious blue eyes that always seemed to be apologizing for someone else's decisions. Claire lived in a permanent state of professional terror, moving through the hospital with folders clutched to her chest like shields. She glanced at Aurora, then quickly away. Holloway adjusted his cuffs. "Good. Until they arrive, no one interacts with the dog without my authorization." Aurora stared at him. "He needs water, dim light, and distance from the crowd. He needs containment. Containment is what broke him loose." Holloway took a breath through his nose. His anger was not loud, but Aurora could see it arranging itself. "Ms. Hayes, report to my office after this incident is resolved." Danica took a step forward. "Richard," she prevented a mauling. Holloway turned his head slowly. "Charge Nurse Moore. I would be very careful about inserting yourself into an active administrative matter." Danica's lips pressed together. Her eyes burned, but she said nothing. Aurora hated him then, not dramatically, not in the fiery way stories prefer, but with a tired precision. Men like Holloway did not simply punish defiance. They taught rooms to abandon the defiant. The next 20 minutes stretched like wire. Titan was eventually guided, not by force but by distance and patience, into a temporary side corridor while the lower-level kennel was inspected. Aurora was ordered to remain away from him. She stood beside the medication cart, hands at her sides, listening to every sound he made. She could tell when he paced. She could tell when his breathing spiked. She could tell when one of the security officers stood too close because Titan's claws clicked faster against the tile. The knowledge lived in her body like an old song. Around her, the emergency wing tried to reconstruct normal life. Nurses picked up spilled supplies. Patients were reassured. Peter Dawson apologized to the four-pole, then to the patient, then to Danica, who told him with surprising tenderness to breathe before he apologized to the wall. For one brief moment, Aurora almost smiled. Humor, small and absurd, had saved people in worse places than hospitals. Then she saw Holloway speaking quietly to Claire near the elevators, his eyes returning to Aurora again and again, and the smile died before it reached her face. Danica came to stand beside her. Up close, the charge nurse looked older than she usually allowed herself to appear. There were faint lines around her mouth, silver threads at her temples, and a small coffee stain on her sleeve shaped vaguely like the state of Texas. "You want to explain how you knew that dog's name?" she asked softly. Aurora watched Holloway. "Not particularly. That answer is going to age badly. Most honest answers do." Danica huffed once, not quite a laugh. "You scared half the hospital." "I didn't bring the dog." "No, but you knew him." Aurora said nothing. Danica's voice softened. "Aurora, I have worked with you for 11 months. You do your job better than half the people here and quieter than all of them. You never talk about family. Never talk about where you trained before Denver. Never mention old friends. You eat lunch alone, leave on time unless someone needs help, and look at exits whenever a room gets loud." Aurora turned slightly. Danica held her gaze. "I notice things. That is why I am charge nurse and why my sons never got away with lying about broken lamps." Despite herself, Aurora's mouth twitched. Danica saw it and pointed at her. "There. Proof of life." Then her expression sobered. "Richard is going to come after you for this." "I know. You say that like you've been waiting for it." Aurora looked toward the corridor where Titan had been taken. "Maybe I have." Richard Holloway's office sat on the 4th floor, overlooking the employee parking lot and the snow-dusted pines beyond it. The room was tasteful in a way that felt purchased rather than lived in. Framed awards, a polished walnut desk, 2 leather chairs positioned lower than his own, and a photograph of Holloway shaking hands with a state senator. Holloway stood behind the desk when Aurora entered, which meant he wanted the height of the room on his side. Claire Whitman sat in the corner with a tablet, eyes down, shoulders drawn inward. "Sit," Holloway said. Aurora remained standing. "I'm on shift. You are under administrative review. For calming a dog. For unauthorized contact with a military asset, creating confusion during an active security incident, and refusing direct instruction from hospital leadership." Aurora let the words settle. They were not spontaneous. He had already built the shape of the accusation while Titan was still trembling. "That is not what happened." Holloway smiled without warmth. "That is what the report will reflect unless there is information you would like to provide." There it was. The door disguised as a trap. "Tell me who you are, and I will decide how to use it." Aurora felt the old instinct again, the one that sealed her mouth before danger could enter through it. "I responded to an immediate safety risk," she said. "Nothing more." Holloway leaned forward. His face, under the office lights, showed fine lines of irritation around the eyes and mouth. His neatly trimmed beard could not soften the sharpness of his jaw. "You knew the animal's name?" "Yes." "How?" "I heard it." "From whom?" Aurora did not answer. Claire's fingers paused over the tablet. Holloway's smile thinned. "Ms. Hayes, this hospital cannot employ staff who conceal relevant information during federal incidents." "Then you should write that down accurately." His eyes hardened. "Be careful." Aurora looked at him, and for a moment she was not in his office. She was in another room years earlier, with concrete walls and a red emergency light blinking overhead, while a man with more rank than mercy told her that silence was necessary for everyone's protection. "Be careful," he had said then too, as if carefulness had ever saved the people who needed saving most. Holloway dismissed her with a temporary restriction from handling trauma intake until further review. It was petty, immediate, and designed to humiliate. When Aurora returned downstairs, several staff members looked away too quickly. News had already grown legs. By evening, the story would become whatever made people feel safest. Aurora had acted strangely. Aurora had hidden something. Aurora had made the military dog worse. Aurora had somehow caused the breach. People did not always choose lies because they believed them. Sometimes they chose lies because truth required courage they had spent all day using on smaller things. Aurora understood that better than she wanted to. She finished the rest of her shift in silence, assigned to chart audits and discharge paperwork, while other nurses moved through the emergency rooms she had been trusted in that morning. Danica argued once, quietly, with Holloway near the nurses' station and lost. Peter brought Aurora a coffee he claimed was accidental because he had misjudged the number of hands he had. It was too sweet and mostly creamer, but she thanked him. Small kindnesses were awkward little birds. They landed where they could. At 7:40 p.m., Aurora stepped outside into the staff parking lot. Snow had begun to fall in earnest, soft flakes spinning through the amber security lights. Her old pickup sat near the far fence, its blue paint dulled by years of weather, its heater unreliable, its passenger seat occupied by a canvas bag and a paperback she had been pretending to read for 3 weeks. She paused before opening the door. From somewhere below the building, faint but distinct, came a sound that froze her hand around her keys. A bark. Not loud, not frantic. One sharp call, followed by silence. Titan. Aurora closed her eyes. In the myths her grandmother used to tell when Aurora was a child in northern Arizona, animals sometimes carried messages from gods, warnings wrapped in fur and breath. Her grandmother, Elise Hayes, had been a small Navajo woman with silver hair down to her waist and hands that smelled of sage and bread. She used to say that the world spoke first in whispers, then in storms. Aurora had not believed that for years. She had believed in training, pressure bandages, exit routes, and the grim arithmetic of survival. But standing in the snow outside St. Gabriel Medical Center, hearing a dog from a life she had buried call once from the dark below, she wondered if storms had memories too. She got into the truck, but did not start it. Her reflection stared back from the windshield. Tired gray eyes, loose strands of brown hair, a face composed by force rather than peace. You should have kept walking, she told herself. But the sentence had no strength. She had never truly been good at walking away from the wounded. That was the flaw and the blessing, the little holy crack through which every disaster in her life had entered. Inside the hospital, Richard Holloway was likely drafting his report, shaping her into a problem that could be managed. Downstairs, Titan was alone among strangers, waiting for a handler who might not come tonight. And somewhere beyond the snow, the past had heard its name spoken. Aurora started the truck. The engine coughed, complained, then turned over. She sat there while the windshield wipers dragged snow aside in slow, uneven arcs. Tomorrow, the military liaison would arrive. Tomorrow, Holloway would ask sharper questions. Tomorrow, the staff would whisper. Tomorrow, perhaps, the sealed doors of Aurora Hayes' life would begin to open. But tonight, the hospital glowed behind her like a wounded citadel. Titan breathed somewhere beneath it. And Aurora understood with a cold certainty that the quiet life she had built in Cedar Ridge was already ending. Morning came to Cedar Ridge wrapped in hard white silence. Snow covered the hospital roof, the pine branches, and the employee parking lot, making St. Gabriel Medical Center look peaceful in a way that felt almost dishonest. Aurora Hayes arrived before sunrise with a paper cup of gas station coffee cooling in one hand and the collar of her old gray coat pulled high against the wind. She had slept badly, though badly was a generous word. Sleep had come in broken pieces, each one edged with the sound of Titan's single bark from beneath the hospital and the memory of his scarred muzzle pressing against her knee. By 4 a.m, she had given up pretending. She had stood in the small kitchen of her rented house at the edge of Cedar Ridge, watching snow gather on the porch railing while her kettle screamed like a warning no one else could hear. The house was modest, 1 bedroom, pale walls, uneven floorboards, and a back window facing a line of dark pines. Aurora had chosen it because it was quiet, because the landlord asked few questions, and because the nearest neighbor was an elderly widower who minded his own business and fed stray cats with the seriousness of a priest giving communion. She had built her life there piece by piece. A thrift store table, 2 mugs, 1 chair she actually liked, a stack of nursing journals, and a small wooden box in the closet she never opened. It was not much, but it was hers. For 8 years, that had been enough. At the employee entrance, 2 nurses stopped talking when they saw her. One looked down at her phone. The other offered a smile so thin it collapsed before it reached her eyes. Aurora nodded as if she had not noticed. She had learned long ago that being washed was easier than being pitted. Inside the emergency department, the air smelled of disinfectant, burnt coffee, and the nervous aftermath of yesterday's chaos. Someone had righted the supply cart. Someone had replaced the cracked medication tray. But hospitals remembered things even after the floors were cleaned. The staff moved around the corridor with careful glances toward the lower-level stairwell, as if the dog might erupt from the earth again like some old beast out of a mountain legend. Danica Moore stood at the nurse's station with a clipboard in one hand and her glasses low on her nose. In daylight, Danica's strength had a different shape. She was tall, broad-shouldered, and graceful in the practical way of women who had spent years walking quickly toward emergencies while everyone else walked away. Her dark braids were wound into a bun, and her brown eyes missed very little. She looked Aurora over once. "You look like you fought a snowplow and lost politely," she said. Aurora hung her coat on the back of a chair. The snowplow apologized. Danica's mouth twitched. "Good. I raised you better than to lose to rude machinery." The humor was small, but it helped. For half a second, Aurora could almost pretend the morning was ordinary. Then Danica lowered her voice. "Richard is already here." Aurora looked toward the administrative elevator. "Of course he is. He came in at 6. Claire's been printing incident packets." "Not one packet. Packets. Plural. The man is building a paper castle and hoping nobody notices it's made of straw." Aurora reached for the assignment sheet. Her name was not under trauma, intake, or medication rotation. She had been placed on discharge calls and supply audits, duties usually given to nurses recovering from illness or being quietly punished. Danica watched her notice. "I argued." "I know. Not enough, apparently. You argued enough to still have a job." Danica's face hardened. "Do not make peace with being treated like this." Aurora looked at the board, at her name isolated from the real work of the department, and felt the old familiar door inside herself close. Peace has nothing to do with it. Before Danica could answer, the sliding doors opened, and 2 uniformed soldiers stepped into the emergency wing. The first was Major Nathan Walker. He was 41, tall, spare, and weathered in a way that suggested more desert sun than mountain cold. His hair was dark brown with early gray at the temples, cut close to the scalp. A short scar crossed the left side of his jaw, pale against tanned skin, and his eyes were sharp blue, not unfriendly, but trained to strip rooms down to exits, risks, and lies. He moved without hurry, which made him more noticeable than if he had rushed. Beside him walked Sergeant Leah Grant, 29, compact and athletic, with copper-red hair tucked into a tight military bun and a face dusted with freckles that made her look younger until one noticed her eyes. Those eyes were green, level, and deeply unimpressed by civilian panic. Leah carried a tablet and a black case marked with military veterinary insignia. She had the quiet confidence of someone who had been underestimated often enough to develop a taste for proving people wrong. Richard Holloway emerged from the administrative corridor almost as if summoned by the sound of authority. His charcoal suit was immaculate. His iron-gray hair sat perfectly in place. Not even the snowstorm had been allowed to touch him. Claire Whitman followed 2 steps behind, pale blonde hair tucked neatly behind one ear, tablet clutched to her chest. Claire looked like a woman who had already apologized 3 times that morning and was preparing for several more. Holloway extended a hand to Nathan with controlled warmth. "Major Walker, thank you for coming so promptly." Richard Holloway, hospital director. Nathan shook his hand once. "Major Nathan Walker, military liaison and incident review officer. This is Sergeant Grant." Leah nodded but did not smile. Holloway gestured toward the hallway. "We have prepared a conference room. I can brief you before you inspect the animal." Nathan's eyes moved past him, briefly scanning the nurse's station, the repaired cart, the staff pretending not to listen, and finally Aurora. The glance lasted less than a second, but Aurora felt it land. Not accusation. Recognition of a question. "I would like to see the dog first," Nathan said. Holloway's smile held, but the edges strained. "Of course. However, I should note that the animal's behavior yesterday was significantly worsened by unauthorized staff interference." Danica's pen stopped moving. Aurora continued looking at the assignment sheet. Nathan's expression did not change. "I'll determine that after review." They passed toward the lower-level stairwell. Titan's name was not spoken, but Aurora felt it moving through the corridor like a bell underwater. She forced herself to pick up a clipboard and begin checking supply expiration dates. Gauze, saline flushes, sterile gloves. Ordinary objects. Safe objects. None of them cared who she had been. 10 minutes later, Peter Dawson approached with a box of tongue depressors balanced in both hands. His red hair stuck up in the back, and his freckles seemed brighter when he was nervous, which was almost always. "I think these go in exam 4, he said. "They do." "Great. I knew that. I was just testing the hallway." Aurora took the box from him. The hallway passed. He smiled, then glanced toward the stairwell. People are saying things. People usually do. Bad things. Those two. Peter shifted his weight. "I don't think you caused it. The dog thing. I mean, I saw him. He came to you like he knew where he was going." Aurora placed the box on the cart. "Thank you, Peter." He nodded, clearly wanting to say more and lacking the architecture for courage. Then he fled toward exam 4, nearly colliding with a respiratory therapist. By mid-morning, Holloway's version of events had spread through the hospital with suspicious efficiency. Aurora heard pieces of it in passing, never directly. She had contacted the handler beforehand. She had some strange obsession with military dogs. She had escalated the breach by saying the dog's name. She had endangered patients to make herself look heroic. The rumors were absurd, but absurdity had never stopped a rumor that served power. Nurses who had once asked her to cover 5 minutes at lunch now avoided her eyes. A young resident named Dr. Miles Avery, a tall, nervous man with black-framed glasses and a habit of speaking too quickly, walked halfway toward her with a chart, seemed to remember something, then turned around and gave it to Danica instead. Aurora felt no surprise. Hurt came later for people who had expected better. She had trained herself not to. At 11:20, Claire Whitman appeared at the end of the corridor. "Aurora," she said softly, "Major Walker would like to speak with you." The nurse's station quieted. Danica looked up. Aurora set down the inventory list. "Where?" "Family consultation room B." Claire swallowed. "Richard is there too." "Of course he is," Danica muttered. Aurora walked beside Claire through the corridor. The administrative coordinator kept her eyes ahead, her thin shoulders tight. After several steps, Claire whispered, "I'm sorry." Aurora glanced at her. "For what?" Claire's fingers tightened around the tablet. "I don't know yet. That's the problem." Then she opened the consultation room door and stepped aside. Major Walker stood by the window, his hands folded behind his back. Sergeant Grant sat at the small table with her tablet open. Holloway occupied the chair nearest the door, a deliberate choice that allowed him to appear both present and in control. On the table lay printed copies of the incident report. Aurora recognized Holloway's formatting immediately. Clean margins, official language, and just enough distortion to make a lie look professionally dressed. Nathan turned when she entered. "Ms. Hayes." "Major, please sit." Aurora sat across from Leah Grant. Holloway's gaze stayed on her like a cold hand. Nathan opened a folder. "I've reviewed Director Holloway's preliminary report. I've also inspected MWD Titan and spoken with Sergeant Grant regarding his condition." Aurora's face remained still, but her pulse shifted at Titan's name. Nathan noticed. "Of course he did. The dog is physically stable," he continued. "Anxious, sleep-deprived, but not aggressive in the way this report suggests." Holloway leaned forward. "Major, with respect, multiple staff witnessed." Nathan lifted one hand. Not sharply, just enough. Holloway stopped. Leah looked as if she enjoyed that more than military discipline allowed. Nathan's attention returned to Aurora. "What I need to understand is why Titan responded to you." Aurora folded her hands on the table. "He was frightened. That explains why he needed calming. It doesn't explain why you could calm him. Some dogs respond to a quiet voice." Leah spoke for the first time. Her voice was low, dry, and edged with intelligence. "Not that dog. Not like that." Silence gathered. Aurora looked at Leah. The sergeant held her gaze without hostility. There was respect there, but also challenge. "Titan refused food this morning," Leah said. "He refused water until I backed away from the kennel and left the bowl inside. He tracked every movement Major Walker made. He tolerated me because I know how not to insult a working dog. But when one of the security officers walked too close, Titan nearly shattered a reinforced panel trying to get distance. That is not a dog who gives trust freely." Nathan placed another paper on the table. And yet yesterday, he placed his head on your knee. Holloway's eyes flicked between them. Aurora could feel his impatience building. He wanted a confession, a weakness, anything he could turn into ownership. I don't know what you want me to say, she said. Nathan's voice remained calm. The truth would be useful. Aurora almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because truth had been treated as contraband for so many years that hearing it requested politely felt like a joke told in a church. Nathan studied her for a moment, then opened a second folder. Your civilian records begin 8 years ago in Flagstaff, Arizona. Nursing license reinstatement, trauma certification, then employment at a private clinic in Grand Junction, followed by Denver Mercy, then St. Gabriel. Holloway looked sharply at Nathan. He had not known this detail. Aurora felt the room tilt slightly. Before that, Nathan continued, there is almost nothing. No ordinary employment record. No complete education trail accessible through civilian systems. No continuous state tax history under this name prior to that point. That is unusual. Aurora kept her breathing slow. Leah's eyes flicked briefly to Aurora's hands, perhaps noting that they had not moved. Nathan closed the folder. People do not usually appear out of fog at 24 years old with advanced trauma instincts and a classified military dog responding to them by name. Holloway's satisfaction was immediate and ugly. So she has misrepresented herself to this hospital. I didn't say that, Nathan replied. But she clearly has withheld relevant background. Holloway turned to Aurora. Ms. Hayes, you were required to disclose prior employment related to specialized emergency care. Aurora looked at him. I disclosed everything required for my nursing credentials. Not everything relevant. Relevant to whom? Holloway's face tightened. Nathan watched the exchange closely. Aurora felt the old danger now. Not like thunder, but like ice underfoot. One careless step, and the life she had built would crack open in front of men who saw people as files. Nathan lowered his voice. Ms. Hayes, I am not here to expose you for sport. I am here because a military working dog assigned to federal transport breach containment in a civilian hospital bypassed multiple people and responded to a nurse whose records do not behave like normal records. That combination requires explanation. Aurora looked toward the frosted window. Outside, snow slid from a pine branch in a sudden white fall. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. Titan does not need another handler shouting commands at him. Leah's expression changed slightly. Nathan leaned forward. Aurora turned back to him. He doesn't need to be dragged, cornered, or proven wrong. He is not disobedient. He is separated from the one person he trusts most, trapped in a strange place full of alarms and fear, surrounded by people who see him as a threat before they see him as alive. Her throat tightened, but she did not let it show. Titan does not need a handler right now. He needs someone he trusts. The sentence settled over the room. Leah looked down at her tablet, then away, as if giving the words space. Nathan's eyes remained on Aurora, and in them she saw the moment his suspicion changed shape. It did not disappear. It became deeper. Holloway, however, heard only defiance. That is sentimental nonsense, he said. Aurora turned her head slowly. No, it is field experience. Holloway went still. Claire, standing near the door, forgot to breathe. Nathan's face remained composed, but something sharpened in his eyes. Aurora realized what she had said a heartbeat too late. The door had opened an inch. Not enough for the whole pass to enter, but enough for everyone in the room to feel the draft. Nathan closed his folder. I'd like to speak with Ms. Hayes alone. Holloway straightened. Absolutely not. She is hospital staff under administrative review. She is also a witness in a military incident. This is my facility. Nathan looked at him then, fully, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. And Titan is not your dog. Holloway's jaw worked once. Leah Grant looked at her tablet with the deeply professional expression of someone trying not to smile. Claire stepped back from the door, as if hoping the wall would absorb her. After a long moment, Holloway stood. I will be right outside. That is your choice, Nathan said. When the door closed behind Holloway, the room exhaled. Nathan did not speak immediately. He sat across from Aurora, not too close, not leaning in, not performing kindness. Who were you, he asked. Aurora looked at her hands. They were steady. That seemed unfair. A nurse. Before that, still a nurse, in one form or another. Aurora. The use of her first name landed unexpectedly soft. She looked up. Nathan's face was not hard now. It was tired. Beneath the officer was a man who had likely delivered bad news to families, signed reports that tasted like ash, and learned how much truth could be carried before it bent the spine. "I know what sealed records look like," he said. "I know what rebuilt civilian identities look like. And I know what it means when a dog like Titan remembers someone the system forgot." Aurora's chest tightened. For one dangerous second, she wanted to tell him. Not all of it. Just enough to put the weight down somewhere. But wanting was not permission. She stood. "Then you should know I can't answer you." Nathan did not stop her. "Can't or won't. Both." Leah Grant watched her with something close to sympathy now. Aurora paused at the door. Behind it, she could hear Holloway's faint voice on a phone, already spinning the next thread of his web. Nathan said, "If Titan deteriorates, may I call for you?" Aurora closed her eyes briefly. There were many answers that would have been safer. "No. Follow protocol. Ask the handler. I am not involved." Instead, she heard herself say, "If he deteriorates, don't wait too long." Nathan nodded. Understood. Aurora opened the door. Holloway turned immediately, phone still in hand. His eyes searched her face for damage. She gave him none. She walked past him into the corridor, where the hospital moved around her with all its bright lights and whispered judgments, and understood that by sunset, the question of her past would no longer belong only to her. The rumors reached the night shift before lunch. Aurora knew because hospitals had their own weather systems. News traveled through them faster than infection. By early afternoon, people who had not even been on duty during Titan's escape had opinions about it. Some believed she had somehow staged the incident. Others believed she had once been military police, military intelligence, military veterinary staff, or something even stranger. Human beings hated uncertainty. Faced with a mystery, they would often choose an incorrect answer over no answer at all. Aurora spent most of the afternoon inventorying supply rooms she normally never entered. The assignment came directly from Richard Holloway. Every hour another task appeared. Expired gloves, storage audits, equipment verification, busy work disguised as discipline. She accepted every assignment without complaint. That frustrated Holloway more than resistance would have. The third-floor supply room sat at the far end of an administrative corridor rarely used by patients. It was quiet there. Quiet enough that Aurora could hear the wind pushing snow against the building. She was checking oxygen mask inventory when the door opened. Nathan Walker stepped inside. He carried no folder this time. No tablet. No military escort. Just a paper cup of coffee. "You keep finding interesting places to hide," he said. Aurora continued counting supplies. "I wasn't hiding." "That's debatable." She marked another number on the clipboard. Nathan studied her. The longer he observed her, the more certain he became that almost everything Richard Holloway said about Aurora Hayes was wrong. People seeking attention behaved differently. People trying to manipulate situations behaved differently. Aurora seemed to be doing the exact opposite. Every instinct she displayed suggested someone attempting to disappear. That alone made her interesting. Nathan leaned against a shelf. "You know what bothered me most this morning?" Aurora did not answer. "Your records." That got her attention. She looked up. Nathan noticed something. Not fear. Not panic. Exhaustion. As if she had spent years carrying a burden she was tired of protecting. "My records bother a lot of people. They don't bother me." "No. They confuse me." Aurora returned to her clipboard. Nathan continued. "Military records disappear. Sometimes. Intelligence records disappear. Sometimes. People disappear." Aurora remained silent. Nathan nodded slowly. "But skills don't disappear." The room became very still. Nathan took a sip of coffee. Trauma assessment. No reaction. Situational awareness. Nothing. Canine behavioral intervention. A pause. Tiny. Almost invisible. But Nathan caught it. There. A response. "You recognize Titan immediately." Aurora set down the clipboard. "Nathan." It was the first time she had used his first name. "You should stop." His eyebrow lifted. "Why?" "Because you're asking questions you won't get answers to." "That doesn't mean I stop asking." Aurora almost smiled. That answer told her more about Nathan Walker than any personnel file could. He was stubborn. The dangerous kind. Not loud. Not reckless. Persistent. The sort of man who would spend 10 years pulling at a thread because something about it felt wrong. The kind of man who eventually found the truth, even when the truth preferred staying buried. "You remind me of someone." Nathan tilted his head. "Friend." No. Enemy. Aurora considered. Both. Nathan laughed softly. The sound surprised both of them. Then his radio crackled. His expression changed immediately. Professional. Focused. Walker. A voice responded. Urgent. Nathan listened. Aurora watched the color drain slightly from his face. What happened? Nathan lowered the radio. Tighten. Every muscle in Aurora's body tightened. What about him? He stopped eating. She was already moving. Nathan followed. The lower-level kennel felt colder than the rest of the hospital. Titan lay in the corner of the reinforced enclosure. The massive Belgian Malinois looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Emotionally. His ears remained flat. His eyes tracked every movement. Leah Grant knelt near the kennel. The red-haired sergeant looked frustrated. She stood when Aurora arrived. He won't touch food. Aurora approached slowly. Titan saw her. The change was immediate. Not dramatic. Not explosive. But immediate. His head lifted. His tail moved once. Then again. Leah noticed. Nathan noticed. Everyone noticed. Aurora crouched beside the enclosure. Titan pressed closer to the gate. His nose touched the metal mesh. You stubborn idiot. The dog made a soft sound. Almost a sigh. Aurora glanced at the untouched food bowl. How long? 12 hours, Leah said. Aurora closed her eyes briefly. 12 hours. Too long. Titan wasn't refusing food because he disliked the food. He was grieving. Animals understood absence. Sometimes better than humans. His handler. Nathan answered. Still recovering. Aurora nodded. That explained everything. Titan didn't understand hospitals. Didn't understand cardiac events. Didn't understand recovery timelines. All he understood was that the person he trusted most had disappeared. Again, the world had taught him that disappearance often meant death. Aurora knew because the world had taught her the same lesson. She looked through the gate. Hey, partner. Titan moved closer. You need to eat. The dog's eyes never left hers. Leah folded her arms. Is he listening? Yes. Then why isn't he eating? Aurora smiled sadly. Because listening and healing aren't the same thing. The answer lingered. Leah looked away first. Nathan understood exactly what Aurora meant. Because he suspected she wasn't talking about the dog anymore. Footsteps echoed from the corridor. Richard Holloway arrived. His timing was terrible. Or perfect, depending on perspective. The director stopped when he saw Aurora beside the kennel. His face tightened. What is she doing here? Leah looked unimpressed. Helping. She is not authorized. Neither is starvation. Leah's voice cut through him. Nathan almost smiled. Holloway clearly wasn't accustomed to being interrupted, especially by young sergeants. Major Walker, Holloway said carefully, I strongly object to. Titan stood. The dog moved toward Aurora. Not Holloway. Not Nathan. Not Leah. Aurora. The movement silenced everyone. The dog placed his head against the gate exactly where Aurora's hand rested. A simple gesture, yet somehow more powerful than any argument. Holloway watched it happen, and something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger. Not yet. Fear. Tiny. Brief. But real. Because for the first time he realized something dangerous. Aurora Hayes was not who he thought she was. And whatever she actually was seemed connected to forces larger than his hospital. Much larger. That realization frightened him. Because men like Richard Holloway preferred environments they controlled. Aurora represented variables. Unknowns. History. And history had a habit of becoming evidence. That evening, Nathan sat alone inside the temporary office the military had established on the second floor. Snow fell beyond the window. Stacks of paperwork covered the desk. Titan's reports. Security reports. Hospital reports. Aurora's records. Or what little existed. Nathan opened the file again. Aurora Hayes. Age 32. Emergency nurse. 8-year civilian history. Nothing before. Almost nothing. The absence itself felt unnatural. Then he found something new. A minor notation buried inside an archived licensing transfer. Not classified. Not hidden. Simply overlooked. Most people would have missed it. Nathan didn't. A processing officer. A signature. An authorization code. Military. Old. Almost 10 years old. His pulse quickened. Not because he had discovered the answer. Because he had discovered a direction. Someone had helped build Aurora's civilian identity. Someone official. Someone important. Nathan stared at the page. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside the kennel downstairs, Titan finally finished half a bowl of food after Aurora sat beside him for nearly an hour. And somewhere inside St. Gabriel Medical Center, Richard Holloway sat in his office making phone calls he did not want documented. 3 people, 3 separate paths, all moving toward the same truth. None of them fully understood it yet. But the storm that began with a military dog breaking loose in a hospital was no longer about the dog. It was becoming something much larger. And for the first time in 8 years, Aurora Hayes felt the past beginning to move toward her instead of away from her. She stood outside the kennel before leaving for the night. Titan lay curled against the blanket, exhausted, watching her, the same way soldiers watched departing helicopters, as if uncertain whether they would ever see them again. Aurora touched the gate. "You'll see him soon." Titan's ears twitched. She wished she believed her own words as easily as he did. Then she turned and walked toward the elevator. Behind her, the dog remained calm. Ahead of her, questions waited. And somewhere far beyond Cedar Ridge, hidden behind sealed files and forgotten decisions, someone was about to learn that Aurora Hayes had finally been found. The storm arrived before dawn. Heavy snow rolled across Cedar Ridge, turning roads white and swallowing the distant mountains behind a curtain of ice and wind. By 6 o'clock, St. Gabriel Medical Center stood alone against the weather, its glowing windows shining through the storm like a ship lost at sea. Aurora Hayes had been awake since 4. She sat alone at the small kitchen table in her rented house, staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Sleep had visited her briefly, then fled. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Titan. Sometimes he was in the kennel beneath the hospital. Sometimes he was running through a desert she had spent years trying to forget. The dreams were always the same. Dust, gunfire, rotor blades, and a military dog refusing to leave her side. At 7:22, her phone rang. The screen showed Danica Moore. Aurora answered immediately. Danica never called before shift unless something was wrong. "Aurora." Danica sounded different. Tense. "What happened?" "It's Titan." Aurora was already standing. "What about him?" "Get here." The line went dead. 20 minutes later, Aurora pushed through the emergency entrance. The atmosphere inside felt wrong. Not busy. Not chaotic. Worried. People moved quickly but quietly, the way medical professionals move when they know something serious is happening but haven't yet admitted how serious. Danica met her near the elevators. The charge nurse looked exhausted. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes. Lower level. Aurora didn't waste time asking questions. She headed directly toward the kennel. Nathan Walker appeared halfway down the corridor. His expression confirmed everything. Something had gone very wrong. "What's happening?" Nathan fell into step beside her. "Titan collapsed 40 minutes ago." Aurora stopped walking. For 1 second. Only one. Then she moved again. "Why?" "We don't know." "Vitals. Unstable. Symptoms." Nathan hesitated. "Seizure activity." Aurora's stomach dropped. The lower-level kennel was packed. Security personnel, military personnel, hospital staff. Everyone crowded around the reinforced enclosure. Leah Grant knelt beside Titan. The red-haired sergeant looked more frightened than Aurora had ever seen her. That alone was alarming. Leah wasn't easily rattled. Titan lay on his side. The massive Belgian Malinois trembled violently. Foam clung to one side of his mouth. His muscles locked and released in painful spasms. One of the military veterinarians was attempting to secure in 4-line. Another was reading medication dosages from a tablet. Neither looked confident. Aurora recognized the problem immediately. The team was competent. But competence wasn't the same thing as familiarity. Titan wasn't a standard patient. He wasn't responding normally. Fear was complicating everything. Aurora stepped forward. A young military veterinarian blocked her path. His name tag read Lieutenant Eric Vaughn, 27. Tall, clean-shaven, broad-shouldered. His dark hair was cropped close to his scalp. The kind of officer who had always succeeded academically, but had not yet accumulated enough failure to become comfortable with uncertainty. "You can't be in here." Aurora ignored him. "Titan." The dog's eyes opened. Only slightly. But they opened. Leah saw it. Nathan saw it. Everyone saw it. Vaughn looked confused. Aurora crouched beside the kennel. "What medication?" "Diazepam." "How much?" He told her. Aurora's jaw tightened. "Too little. Not dangerously little, but insufficient." She looked at Leah. "When did the seizure begin?" "Approximately 6 minutes before intervention." Aurora swore under her breath. Titan's body jerked again. The sight hit harder than she expected. Not because he was a military working dog. Not because he was valuable, because he was Titan. And despite everything she had told herself over the years, that distinction still mattered. Aurora moved. Fast. Before anyone could stop her. She was inside the kennel. Lieutenant Vaughn protested immediately. Nathan ignored him. Aurora dropped beside Titan. Every movement became automatic. Instinct. Training. Memory. Her hands found the correct positions without conscious thought. Airway. Breathing. Muscle tension. Eye response. Temperature. The process happened so quickly that several observers failed to follow it. What are you doing? Vaughn demanded. Aurora didn't look up. Saving your dog. Titan's breathing changed. Slightly. Aurora adjusted her grip. Increased dosage. Vaughn blinked. What? Dose adjustment. We already calculated. Increase it. The lieutenant hesitated. Aurora finally looked at him. Her gray eyes locked onto his. Something in her expression silenced him instantly. Not authority. Not arrogance. Experience. The unmistakable look of someone who had performed this exact procedure under circumstances far worse than a hospital kennel. Nathan noticed it. Leah noticed it. So did Vaughn. The lieutenant stopped arguing. The medication was adjusted. Titan's body seized again. Then slowly, very slowly, the violent tremors began to weaken. Aurora kept one hand against his chest. Counting. Measuring. Waiting. The world narrowed. Noise disappeared. People disappeared. Questions disappeared. There was only the dog. And the responsibility. 5 minutes passed. Then 7. Then 10. Finally Titan's breathing stabilized. Not normal, but stable. The kennel exhaled as one. Leah sat back against the wall. Relief flooded her face. Nathan folded his arms. His suspicions had just become certainty. No civilian ER nurse performed like that. Not under pressure. Not with military veterinary protocols. Not with a classified working dog. Aurora remained kneeling beside Titan. Her hand rested lightly against his shoulder. The old scar beneath his fur sat exactly where she remembered. She hated that she remembered. The memory made everything harder. A sound interrupted the silence. Distant at first. Then louder. Rotor blades. Everyone looked up. The rhythm was unmistakable. A helicopter. Military. Nathan's expression changed immediately. Leah stood. That wasn't scheduled. No. The rotors grew louder. Closer. The entire building seemed to vibrate. Aurora closed her eyes briefly. She already knew. Before anyone said it. Before anyone confirmed it. She knew. Because there were only a handful of people important enough to trigger that response. Only a handful of people who would come personally. And only one who would come for her. The helicopter landed on the hospital roof. Richard Holloway was furious. The director stormed through administrative corridors demanding explanations from anyone unfortunate enough to cross his path. Nobody had answers. The military hadn't requested permission. They had simply informed the hospital that a transport aircraft was arriving. And then it had arrived. Richard hated situations he couldn't control. Today was becoming one long exercise in helplessness. Claire Whitman followed him through the hallway carrying a tablet and trying unsuccessfully to keep pace. Richard. No. Maybe we should wait until. No. Claire sighed. Years of working beside Holloway had taught her exactly how dangerous his pride could become when threatened. The elevator doors opened. Nathan Walker stepped out. Richard intercepted him immediately. What is going on? Nathan looked tired. Military transport. I know it's military transport. Then you know as much as I do. Richard's jaw tightened. Nathan stepped past him. The major headed toward the stairwell leading to roof access. Leah followed. Aurora followed. Richard followed. By the time they reached the roof, the helicopter had already powered down. Snow swirled across the landing pad. The side door opened. A man stepped out. Everything changed. Colonel Samuel Brooks was 60 years old. Tall, broad, gray-haired, weathered by decades of service. His face carried deep lines carved by responsibility rather than age. A scar crossed the bridge of his nose. Another disappeared beneath the collar of his coat. He moved with the effortless authority possessed by people who no longer needed rank to announce itself. Everyone knew who was in charge the moment he stepped onto the roof. Not because of insignia, because of presence. 3 additional military personnel followed him. None looked relaxed. Samuel's eyes moved across the assembled group. Nathan, Leah, Richard, Claire, Aurora. They stopped. On Aurora. For a long moment neither moved. The snow blew between them. Years passed silently. Then Samuel spoke. Aurora Hayes. Not a question. Aurora swallowed. The sound of her real name coming from his mouth felt like hearing a ghost. Colonel. The word escaped before she could stop it. Richard noticed immediately. So did Nathan. Samuel nodded once. Good. Aurora frowned. Good. Means you're still terrible at pretending. For the first time in hours, something almost resembling a smile appeared on his face. Nathan stared. Leah stared. Richard stared. Nobody understood what they were watching. Except Aurora. And Samuel. The colonel walked forward. He stopped directly in front of her. Closer now. Older. More tired. But unmistakably the same man. The commander who had once led some of the most dangerous operations on Earth. The man who had signed reports nobody else was allowed to read. The man who knew exactly who she had been. You look terrible. Aurora laughed despite herself. So do you. Samuel smiled. A real smile this time. The kind reserved for family. Or survivors. Nathan exchanged a glance with Leah. That look alone answered more questions than weeks of investigation. Richard Holloway looked suddenly nervous. Very nervous. Samuel turned toward Nathan. Status. Nathan provided a brief report. Titan's condition. The incident. Aurora's involvement. The sealed records. Everything. Samuel listened quietly. When Nathan finished, the colonel nodded. Then he looked back at Aurora. Titan. Stable. Good. The relief in Samuel's voice sounded genuine. That detail surprised several people, including Richard. The director had expected military bureaucracy. Not concern. Not loyalty. Not history. Samuel removed a folder from his coat. Thick. Heavy. Official. He held it for a moment. Then looked directly at Aurora. You know why I'm here. Aurora did. The truth had finally arrived. And it had landed on the hospital roof inside a military helicopter. The wind howled across the hospital roof. Snow swirled around the helicopter in white spirals, coating boots, shoulders, and the edges of the landing pad. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The thick folder in Colonel Samuel Brooks' hand seemed to carry more weight than paper should have been capable of carrying. Aurora knew that folder. Not the exact one, but the type. Official. Restricted. Dangerous. The kind of file that changed lives simply by being opened. For 8 years she had lived with the belief that no one would ever open hers again. Now Samuel stood 10 feet away holding her entire buried life beneath one arm. Richard Holloway finally found his voice. What exactly is happening here? Samuel turned his head. The look he gave the hospital director lasted less than a second. Yet somehow it felt like an inspection, an evaluation, a dismissal. Director Holloway. Richard straightened slightly. I'm Colonel Samuel Brooks. I understand that. Samuel nodded. Good. Nothing more. No explanation. No reassurance. No attempt to make Richard comfortable. The colonel turned back toward Aurora. The message was clear. Richard Holloway was not the center of this conversation. For perhaps the first time in years, Richard found himself excluded from the room without physically leaving it. He hated the feeling. Nathan noticed. Leah noticed. Claire Whitman definitely noticed. Samuel gestured toward the roof access door. Conference room. Aurora closed her eyes briefly. There it was. The moment she had spent 8 years avoiding. The moment she had spent 8 years preparing for. And somehow she still felt unready. 20 minutes later, the largest conference room on the second floor contained more authority than the entire town of Cedar Ridge normally saw in a year. Nathan Walker sat near the far end of the table. Leah Grant beside him. Richard Holloway occupied a chair near the middle. Claire Whitman sat silently against the wall with a tablet resting in her lap. Aurora sat opposite Samuel. Outside, snow struck the windows. Inside, nobody touched the coffee that had been brought in. Samuel placed the folder on the table. His weathered hands rested on top of it. For a moment, he simply studied Aurora. The years showed more clearly indoors. He looked older than she remembered. Not weaker, never weaker, but older. Responsibility had carved itself into his face. Aurora understood that feeling. Some burdens left fingerprints. You disappeared. Samuel's voice was quiet. Aurora looked down. I retired. You vanished. The correction was gentle, which somehow made it worse. Aurora nodded. Samuel continued. You stopped answering calls. Yes. You ignored outreach. Yes. You rejected every offer. Aurora smiled faintly. You sound surprised. Samuel almost smiled back. No. The room remained silent. Nathan understood something important in that moment. This wasn't an interrogation. This wasn't a military investigation. This felt personal. Not emotional, but personal. The difference mattered. Samuel opened the folder. The first page appeared. Several military seals decorated the top. Most people in the room didn't recognize them. Nathan did, and what he recognized made his pulse quicken. One seal belonged to an operational command structure that technically didn't exist. Another belonged to a joint task authority rarely referenced outside classified channels. Nathan looked at Aurora. The major suddenly understood why her records felt wrong. They weren't missing. They had been hidden. Very carefully. Samuel slid the first page across the table. It stopped in front of Richard Holloway. The director looked down, then froze. Aurora didn't need to see the document. She already knew what it contained. A photograph. Younger. Thinner. Harder. Aurora wearing desert combat gear. Medical insignia. Tactical equipment. Blood on one sleeve. Titan beside her. Several years younger, but unmistakable. The room felt smaller. Richard stared, then looked up, then back down, then up again. The photograph contradicted everything he believed about Aurora Hayes. The quiet nurse. The isolated employee. The woman he had spent months pushing around. Gone. In her place stood someone he had never known existed. Samuel spoke calmly. Staff Sergeant Aurora Hayes. Nobody interrupted. Combat medical specialist. Another page. Another photograph. Helicopters. Military personnel. Titan. Aurora. A different country. A different life. Attached to Joint Special Operations Unit Shadow Phoenix. Nathan felt Leah straighten beside him. The name carried weight. Even she had heard rumors. Not facts. Rumors. The kind soldiers exchanged in low voices. The kind nobody confirmed. Samuel continued. 7 deployments. Richard's face had become pale. 3 commendations for battlefield medicine. Another page. 2 citations for extraordinary service under hostile conditions. Another page. 1 classified recommendation currently pending declassification review. Aurora closed her eyes. Not because she enjoyed hearing it. Because she didn't. The past always sounded cleaner in reports than it had felt while living through it. No document mentioned fear. No citation mentioned grief. No commendation mentioned nightmares. The papers recorded achievements, not costs. Samuel looked toward Nathan. Titan served with Shadow Phoenix. Nathan nodded slowly. The pieces finally connected. Every one of them. The dog's reaction. Aurora's knowledge. The sealed records. The missing years. Everything. Leah looked at Aurora differently now. Not with suspicion. Not with curiosity. With respect. Professional respect. The kind earned the difficult way. Richard Holloway cleared his throat. This doesn't explain. Samuel's eyes shifted toward him. It was enough. Richard stopped speaking. The colonel returned his attention to the file. Titan and Aurora operated together for nearly 3 years. Nathan blinked. 3 years. Longer than some marriages survived. Long enough to create bonds difficult to explain to civilians. Samuel continued. There were incidents. Aurora's shoulders tightened. She knew which incidents he meant. Samuel chose his words carefully. Several operations resulted in significant casualties. The room grew quiet. No details followed. None were needed. Everyone understood. Leah looked toward Aurora. For the first time she noticed something she should have recognized earlier. Aurora never startled. Never panicked. Never froze. People didn't acquire that level of control naturally. It came from surviving things that permanently changed the nervous system. The realization made Leah unexpectedly sad. Because she suddenly understood why Aurora always seemed lonely. Nathan spoke. Why seal the records? Finally, the question everyone wanted answered. Samuel leaned back slightly. His expression hardened. Because certain operations generated political complications. Nathan frowned. Meaning? Samuel considered. Meaning several people in powerful positions preferred parts of those operations remained difficult to find. Aurora laughed softly. A humorless sound. Samuel glanced at her. You disagree? I think that's the most polite description I've ever heard. Even Samuel smiled at that. Briefly. Then the smile disappeared. The room darkened again. The colonel opened another section of the file. This time he removed a sealed envelope. Aurora immediately recognized it. Her stomach dropped. No. Samuel met her eyes. Yes. You don't need to. I do. The colonel opened the envelope. Inside rested a military commendation certificate. Nathan watched Aurora carefully. For the first time since meeting her, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. Not frightened, not defensive, vulnerable. Samuel unfolded the document. This commendation was approved 7 years ago. Aurora looked away. Samuel continued anyway. It was never delivered. Nobody spoke. The silence became heavy. Nathan felt as though he had accidentally entered a private conversation. Yet he couldn't look away. Samuel read. Not every word. Just enough. A battlefield medical citation. Multiple lives saved. Hostile fire. Extraction support. Operational survival rates exceeding projected expectations. Professional language describing extraordinary courage. Aurora hated every second of it. Because she remembered the reality. The screaming. The blood. The people who hadn't survived. Awards felt strange when measured against graves. Samuel lowered the paper. It should have been given to you years ago. Aurora stared at the window. Snow drifted across the glass. She wished she were outside. Anywhere else. Finally she spoke. They're still dead. The room went completely silent. Nathan looked down. Leah looked away. Samuel remained still. Aurora's voice softened. The people we couldn't bring home. Nobody answered. Because nobody could. Samuel folded the commendation carefully, then placed it back inside the envelope. We know. Aurora swallowed. The conversation had stopped being about records. About classifications. About investigations. Now it was about something far older. Grief. The thing nobody documented properly. A knock interrupted the silence. Claire stood and opened the door. Lieutenant Eric Vaughn appeared. The young veterinarian looked uneasy. Very uneasy. Sorry to interrupt. Samuel nodded. What is it? Vaughn glanced toward Aurora. Then toward Nathan. Titan. Aurora stood instantly. What happened? Another episode. Everyone moved. The conference room emptied within seconds. The lower-level kennel exploded into motion. Titan was conscious, but barely. His breathing had become irregular. His muscles trembled. Something was wrong. Something different from before. Aurora reached the enclosure first. The dog immediately tried to lift his head. Failed. Tried again. Succeeded. His amber eyes locked onto her. Aurora knelt. Her heart tightened. He looked exhausted. Old. Not physically. Emotionally. As if years of stress had finally collected interest. Samuel watched from behind. The colonel had seen Titan in combat. Seen him injured. Seen him bleeding. Seen him charge into situations most humans would flee. This looked worse. Because this looked helpless. Aurora checked vitals. Then paused. Nathan noticed. What? Aurora looked toward Vaughn. His handler. The veterinarian blinked. What about him? He needs his handler. The answer surprised nobody. Not anymore. Aurora continued. Titan isn't just sick. She placed a hand gently against the dog's shoulder. He's waiting. Samuel understood immediately. Nathan did too. The dog wasn't failing because of medicine, or injury, or poor treatment. He was failing because the person he trusted most had disappeared. Again. Samuel exhaled slowly. Marcus. Nathan looked up. His handler. Samuel nodded. Staff Sergeant Marcus Reed. Aurora closed her eyes. The name hit like a memory. Marcus Reed. Titan's handler. Her teammate. Her friend. A man she hadn't seen in 8 years. The realization settled over the room. Slowly. Carefully. Like snow covering old tracks. Marcus Reed was upstairs. Recovering. Alive. And neither he nor Titan knew the other had survived. Aurora opened her eyes. For the first time all day, real hope appeared inside them. Then we need to fix that. And for the first time since arriving at St. Gabriel Medical Center, Colonel Samuel Brooks completely agreed. A pale winter sun struggled through the clouds above Cedar Ridge, casting weak silver light across the snow-covered town. The storm had passed during the night, but its silence remained, hanging over St. Gabriel Medical Center like a warning nobody could yet explain. The reunion happened just after sunrise. Aurora stood outside room 418 with her hands buried in the pockets of her navy jacket. Through the partially open door, she could see Titan lying beside the hospital bed, his massive body curled against the floor as if afraid the person sleeping above him might disappear again. For the first time since arriving at St. Gabriel, the military dog looked peaceful. The patient in the bed was Staff Sergeant Marcus Reed. Marcus was 40 years old, though the hard years had added several more to his face. He possessed the rugged appearance common among long-serving special operations soldiers. His dark brown hair had begun turning gray around the temples. A rough beard covered his jawline. Deep scars crossed his left forearm and disappeared beneath the hospital gown sleeve. His nose had been broken at least twice. One eyebrow carried a thin white scar from an injury sustained years earlier. Despite the physical damage, his most defining feature remained his eyes. They were calm blue eyes belonging to a man who had seen terrible things and somehow chosen kindness anyway. Marcus had spent nearly 2 decades in military service. He had survived firefights, explosions, ambushes, and disasters that most people only saw in movies. Yet nothing in his military career had frightened him as much as waking up yesterday and learning Titan had vanished during transport. The dog had been more than a partner, more than equipment, more than military property. Titan had become family. Inside the room, Marcus slowly stroked the dog's neck. Titan's tail thumped once against the floor. The simple sound carried more relief than words. Aurora watched quietly. She hadn't entered the room. Not yet. Nathan Walker approached from the hallway carrying a folder. You could go inside. Aurora kept her eyes on Titan. He needs this. Nathan studied her. Marcus had asked for Aurora twice already. She knew that. Nathan knew that. Yet she remained outside. The Major understood why. Sometimes reunions reopened wounds people spent years trying to close. He's not angry. Aurora laughed softly. Marcus was never angry. Then what are you worried about? She looked through the doorway. At the dog. At the soldier. At the life she had buried. Myself. Nathan had no response to that. Because he understood. Some ghosts were easier to face from a distance. The elevator doors opened down the hallway. Colonel Samuel Brooks stepped out. Unlike yesterday, he wore civilian clothes. Dark jeans. Heavy coat. Simple boots. Without the uniform, he somehow appeared older. More human. The commander disappeared. The man remained. Samuel approached. Morning. Nathan nodded. Samuel glanced through the door. Marcus looked up immediately. The old soldier smiled. Colonel. Still ugly. Marcus laughed. Good to see you too. Samuel's expression softened. Only slightly. But Aurora noticed. Years ago, Shadow Phoenix had lost people. Good people. Some names existed only on classified reports. Others existed only in memory. Every survivor mattered. Samuel turned toward Aurora. He's asking for you. Aurora sighed. I know. And she looked away. Samuel's voice lowered. Aurora. The tone carried years behind it. Orders. Friendship. Loss. Responsibility. Everything. You saved his dog. Aurora smiled sadly. That was easier. Samuel placed a hand on her shoulder. You've spent 8 years running. Aurora looked at him. I retired. No. Samuel shook his head. You disappeared. The same correction. Again. Because it remained true. Before Aurora could answer, another voice interrupted. Director Holloway is looking for you. Claire Whitman stood near the nurse's station. The administrative coordinator appeared more exhausted every day. Her blonde hair looked rushed. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes. The constant tension inside the hospital was affecting her. Samuel frowned. What now? Claire hesitated, then lowered her voice. Federal investigators arrived. The hallway went silent. Nathan looked up immediately. Samuel's expression changed. Aurora felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Federal investigators. That usually meant one thing. Someone had found something. Richard Holloway sat in conference room, trying very hard not to look nervous. Unfortunately for him, nervousness had become impossible to hide. Federal auditors occupied 3 chairs across from him. Each possessed the calm confidence of people whose authority did not require threats. The lead investigator introduced himself as Daniel Mercer. Daniel was 52 years old, lean, clean-shaven, and relentlessly organized. His silver hair remained neatly combed despite the long morning. Thin reading glasses rested low on his nose. He spoke quietly, listened carefully, and made people uncomfortable without raising his voice. Years earlier, Daniel had investigated financial misconduct inside a federal contractor network. The case had resulted in 32 indictments. Since then, hospitals tended to become nervous whenever he appeared. Daniel opened a file. Director Holloway, we need clarification. Richard forced a smile. Of course. Daniel slid several pages across the table. Patient records. Audit logs. Financial reports. Richard recognized them immediately. His pulse increased. Not visibly, but enough. Daniel noticed. Investigators noticed everything. We discovered inconsistencies. Richard leaned back. What kind of inconsistencies? Daniel folded his hands. Several patient files appear modified after treatment completion. Richard shrugged. Clerical corrections happen. Without documentation, Richard remained silent. Daniel opened another folder. These changes removed physician notes. Another folder. These changes altered treatment timelines. Another. These changes affected billing records. The room felt colder. Richard maintained eye contact. Years of administration had taught him how to survive difficult conversations. Unfortunately, Daniel Mercer wasn't interested in appearances. Only facts. And these payments. Daniel slid forward another document. Richard's stomach tightened. Several unusually large payments appeared. Consulting fees. Administrative reimbursements. External vendor transfers. The amounts weren't enormous. But together they formed a pattern. A suspicious pattern. I'll need time to review those. Daniel nodded. You'll have it. The answer sounded reasonable. Yet Richard somehow felt trapped. Because investigators only became polite after they already possessed evidence. Downstairs, Aurora finally entered Marcus Reed's room. Titan lifted his head immediately. The dog stood, walked toward her, then stopped halfway. The moment felt strangely fragile. 8 years. Thousands of days. Countless miles. All compressed into a single room. Marcus broke the silence. You look older. Aurora laughed. So do you. Fair. The old soldier smiled. For several seconds neither knew what to say, because no sentence adequately covered 8 missing years. Marcus solved the problem first. You vanished. Aurora groaned. Samuel said the same thing. Because it's true. Titan sat beside her. Marcus watched the dog carefully. You know he searched for you. Aurora froze. What? The soldier nodded. After Jordan. The name landed like a punch. Jordan Ellis. Shadow Phoenix medic. Friend. One of the dead. Aurora looked away. Marcus continued quietly. Titan kept searching. The room became painfully still. Marcus sighed. He used to wait outside medical tents. Aurora swallowed hard. Titan leaned against her leg. The dog remembered. Of course he remembered. Dogs always remembered. Especially the things people wished they could forget. A knock interrupted them. Nathan entered. His expression carried bad news. Sorry. Marcus immediately recognized the look. What happened? Nathan glanced toward Aurora. Then toward Marcus. Federal investigators. Marcus frowned. About Aurora? No. Nathan shook his head. About the hospital. The next hour changed everything. Daniel Mercer and his team continued digging. The deeper they looked, the worse things became. Modified records. Missing reports. Deleted complaints. Questionable payments. Every trail eventually pointed toward Richard Holloway's administration. Not directly. Not yet. But repeatedly. Enough times to create concern. Enough times to justify expansion. Enough times to attract additional attention. By late afternoon, employees throughout St. Gabriel began noticing unusual activity. Auditors speaking with department heads. IT personnel reviewing servers. Financial records being copied. Managers being interviewed. Rumors spread rapidly. Richard attempted damage control. It failed. For the first time in years, events were moving beyond his control. That frightened him more than anyone realized. Because Richard Holloway had built his career around control. Control of information. Control of staff. Control of perception. Now strangers were examining things he preferred hidden. And hidden things rarely stayed hidden forever. At sunset, Aurora stood beside a window overlooking the parking lot. Snow reflected orange light from the setting sun. The town looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Samuel approached quietly. How's Marcus? Better. And Titan? Aurora smiled. Asleep. Good. They stood together for a moment. Then Samuel spoke. Something else is happening. Aurora nodded. I know. The investigators. They found something. Samuel folded his arms. More than something. Aurora looked toward him. The colonel's face remained serious. Daniel Mercer contacted Washington. That got her attention. Federal investigators did not contact Washington over paperwork mistakes. Not normally. Aurora understood immediately. Whatever they found was bigger than billing records. Bigger than administrative errors. Samuel watched her expression. You thinking what I'm thinking? Aurora nodded slowly. Richard's hiding something. The colonel looked toward the hospital corridors. Toward the offices. Toward the administrative wing. Question is what? Neither knew the answer. Yet. But somewhere inside St. Gabriel Medical Center, beneath years of paperwork and carefully managed appearances, cracks had begun spreading through the foundation. And sooner or later, everything built on top of those cracks would come crashing down. Night settled over Cedar Ridge beneath a sky of black ice and scattered stars. The storm clouds had finally broken apart, but the cold remained, wrapping St. Gabriel Medical Center in a silence that felt unnatural. Hospitals were never truly quiet. Machines breathed, monitors beeped, doors opened and closed. People suffered, people healed. Life and death negotiated constantly within those walls. Yet sometime after 9 o'clock, Aurora felt something she had learned long ago to trust. A wrongness. Not fear. Not instinct. Something deeper. The same feeling that had once warned her about roadside explosives hidden beneath desert sand. The same feeling that had kept her alive through years of operations nobody was supposed to discuss. Something was coming. She sat alone in the hospital cafeteria finishing a cup of coffee she didn't want. The room was nearly empty. A janitor pushed a floor machine near the far wall. 2 nurses discussed weekend plans. A television mounted above the vending machines played a weather forecast nobody watched. Everything looked normal. That was the problem. Aurora's life had taught her that danger preferred normal-looking disguises. Her phone vibrated. A text message from Nathan Walker. Need a minute. Reviewing security footage. Something strange. Aurora frowned. Before she could reply, another message arrived. 3rd floor west corridor. 8:47 p.m. Unknown visitor. Aurora stood immediately. 5 minutes later, she entered the temporary operations room established by federal investigators. Nathan stood beside a monitor. Daniel Mercer sat nearby reviewing documents. Leah Grant leaned against a desk. Security footage played silently on the screen. A man appeared in frame. Middle-aged. Average height. Dark coat. Baseball cap. Camera hanging around his neck. Ordinary. Too ordinary. Aurora studied him. Daniel noticed. You know him? No. But. Aurora stepped closer. The image paused. The man smiled while speaking to a hospital volunteer. The smile never reached his eyes. Aurora recognized that immediately. Real reporters watch people. This man watched exits. Nathan pointed toward the screen. He signed in as a journalist. Name: Kevin Brooks. Aurora's eyes narrowed. Fake. She didn't know why. Not yet. But fake. Daniel tapped another file. We contacted the newspaper he claimed to represent. Nathan finished the sentence. They've never heard of him. The room grew quiet. Leah folded her arms. So why is he here? Nobody answered. Because everyone already knew. Aurora. The military files. The investigation. The timing was too perfect. Daniel stood. I've requested local law enforcement assistance. Aurora looked at the screen. The man appeared again. This time entering an elevator. Heading upward. Toward administrative floors. Toward areas connected to the investigation. Toward danger. Then the footage ended. No camera captured him leaving. Nathan noticed Aurora's expression. What? Aurora looked toward the ceiling. The answer arrived instantly. The roof. Leah straightened. What? If I needed a private extraction point. Nathan understood. The helicopter pad. A perfect location for data transfer. Signal transmission. Or escape. Aurora was already moving. The stairwell door slammed behind her. Cold air greeted her halfway up. The roof access door stood slightly open. Not wide. Only an inch. But enough. Aurora slowed immediately. Adrenaline sharpened her senses. Wind. Metal. Footsteps. Someone was up there. She pushed the door open. The roof stretched before her beneath moonlight and snow. At first she saw nothing. Then movement. Near the communications equipment. A man crouched beside a laptop. Uploading something. The same man from the security footage. He looked up. Surprise flashed across his face. Only briefly. Then disappeared. Interesting. Most fake reporters would panic. This man didn't. He calmly stood. 45 years old. Lean build. Short black hair. Weathered skin. Clean-shaven. Sharp brown eyes that missed very little. His movements carried discipline. Not military exactly. But trained. Experienced. Dangerous enough. Aurora stopped 20 feet away. Kevin Brooks. The man smiled. No. Didn't think so. The laptop remained open. A progress bar crawled across the screen. 73%. Uploading. Aurora's pulse quickened. Military files. Samuel's documents. Her records. Everything. The man took a small step backward. "You're Aurora Hayes." Not a question. A statement. Aurora remained still. "Who are you?" The smile returned. Cold. Professional. The smile of someone who viewed people as assignments. "My employer is more important than my name." Aurora hated answers like that, because they usually belong to people who believe themselves untouchable. The man gestured toward the laptop. "You've caused quite a stir." Aurora glanced at the screen. 81%. Too high. Not enough time. She needed another solution. "You broke into a federal investigation." The man shrugged. "I collect information." "No." Aurora took one step forward. "You steal it." His eyes narrowed slightly. "There." A reaction. The first real one. Words matter less than results. Aurora almost laughed. The arrogance sounded familiar. She had met versions of this man her entire life. Different names. Different employers. Same personality. People who believed consequences belonged to other people. The upload reached 85%. Aurora's mind calculated distance. Timing. Options. Wind speed. Roof conditions. The old training returned effortlessly. The man noticed. His confidence shifted. Very slightly. "Enough." "You know," he said. "I expected someone older." Aurora said nothing. "I heard stories." Bad move. The moment he said that, Aurora knew. This wasn't random. He knew who she was. Or had known. At least partially. The realization changed everything. The man continued. "Shadow Phoenix." The words disappeared into the wind. Aurora's expression never changed. Inside, her pulse doubled. "Never heard of it." He laughed. "That's why it lasted so long." 90%. The upload continued. The man reached slowly toward the laptop. Aurora moved. Fast. The distance vanished instantly. The man reacted well. Better than expected. He sidestepped. Avoided her first grab. Former training. Definitely. Not military. Security, perhaps. Contractor. Private intelligence. Something similar. The two collided near the communications equipment. Snow exploded beneath their boots. The man struck first. Fast jab. Aurora blocked. Countered. The fight lasted less than 15 seconds. Real fights usually did, despite movies suggesting otherwise. The man was skilled. Aurora was better. Years better. Experience better. She trapped his wrist. Turned. Used his momentum. The man crashed hard into the rooftop surface. Air left his lungs. The laptop slid across the snow. Aurora lunged. Grabbed it. The upload bar froze. 93%. Close. Far too close. The man tried to stand. Aurora kicked the laptop farther away, then drove him back down. Her knee pinned his shoulder. One arm locked behind his back. The fight ended. Just like that. The man stopped struggling. Not because he wanted to. Because he understood. He had lost. Footsteps exploded through the stairwell. Nathan. Leah. Security personnel. Federal investigators. Everyone arrived at once. Nathan stared at the scene. Aurora kneeling on a suspect. Laptop in the snow. The moon shining overhead. "Well," Nathan said. Aurora looked up. "You took your time." Leah laughed despite herself. Daniel Mercer approached the laptop immediately. The investigator examined the screen. His expression darkened. What was he transmitting? One of the federal technicians' connected equipment. 30 seconds later, he looked up. Military records. Personnel histories. Operational references. Investigation files. Everything. The technician swallowed. Somebody wanted this badly. Daniel looked toward the suspect. "Who sent you?" The man smiled. Again. That same irritating smile. "I want a lawyer." Daniel nodded. "That's fair." Then his expression hardened. "But you're getting handcuffs first." The suspect was taken away. Still smiling. That bothered Aurora more than anything. Because confident men rarely smiled after failure. Unless they believed something else remained hidden. Nathan noticed her concern. "What?" Aurora watched the stairwell door close behind the prisoner. He wasn't worried. Nathan followed her gaze. No. He should have been. Daniel joined them. The investigator removed his glasses. For the first time all day, he looked tired. "We found something else." Aurora turned. Daniel handed Nathan a folder. Financial records. Internal communications. Deleted complaints recovered from hospital servers. Nathan read for several seconds. Then looked up. "Richard." Daniel nodded. The evidence trail had become undeniable. Unauthorized record modifications. Suppressed reports. Suspicious payments. Multiple witnesses. Too much. Far too much. Aurora stared across the dark town beyond the roof. Lights glowed in distant houses. Peaceful. Ordinary. Nothing about the night felt ordinary anymore. Below them, inside the hospital, Richard Holloway sat alone in his office, unaware that federal investigators now possessed enough evidence to destroy everything he had spent years building. Unaware that the man sent to steal Aurora's files had failed. Unaware that the walls around him were finally beginning to collapse. And somewhere deep inside St. Gabriel Medical Center, hidden beneath years of lies, the final pieces of the truth were waiting to be uncovered. The sunrise over Cedar Ridge arrived quietly, painting the snow-covered mountains with shades of gold and pale orange. For the first time in days, the sky was clear. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a world that seemed cleaner than before, as if nature itself had decided it was time for the truth to be seen. Inside St. Gabriel Medical Center, however, the storm was only beginning. At 7:12 a.m., Richard Holloway sat alone in his office, staring at a ringing telephone. He knew who was calling. The number belonged to the hospital board. For several seconds, he simply watched the screen. Richard Holloway had spent most of his adult life building an image. Successful administrator, respected executive, trusted leader. He had carefully shaped every public appearance, every board meeting, every speech. The image had become so important that somewhere along the way he began believing it himself. Now that image was collapsing. The phone continued ringing. Finally he answered. Richard. The voice belonged to Eleanor Pierce, chairwoman of the St. Gabriel Board of Directors. 70 years old, silver-haired, elegant, sharp-minded. Eleanor possessed the calm confidence of a woman who had spent 40 years leading organizations through crises. Unlike Richard, she did not need power to feel important. That made her far more dangerous. We need you in conference room A. Richard swallowed. Now. The call ended. No explanation. No discussion. No opportunity to negotiate. Richard stared at the phone. For the first time in many years, fear entered his office. Real fear. Not concern. Not anxiety. Fear. 40 minutes later, conference room A felt more like a courtroom than a board meeting. Eleanor Pierce sat at the head of the long table. Beside her sat 4 additional board members. Each looked exhausted. Folders filled the table. Investigation reports. Financial records. Patient files. Evidence. Daniel Mercer sat near the far end. Nathan Walker occupied another chair. Several attorneys attended remotely through a large monitor. Richard immediately understood the situation. This wasn't a discussion. The decision had already been made. Eleanor folded her hands. Richard. He remained standing. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that I have dedicated 5 years to improving this institution. Daniel Mercer opened a folder. Patient records were altered. Richard ignored him. Our patient satisfaction metrics improved substantially. Another folder opened. Financial transfers were concealed. Richard continued. We expanded services. Daniel looked up. Internal complaints were deleted. Silence followed. Heavy silence. The kind that arrives when facts become impossible to outrun. Eleanor sighed. Not angrily. Sadly. That somehow hurt more. I trusted you. Richard looked away. For years he had believed himself smarter than everyone around him. More capable. More deserving. Now those beliefs felt fragile. Eleanor slid a document across the table. Administrative suspension. Effective immediately. Richard stared at it. The paper seemed absurdly small. Years of power reduced to a few paragraphs. You can't be serious. Eleanor's expression remained calm. We are. Richard laughed. A short, nervous laugh. Nobody joined him. Daniel Mercer spoke. The federal investigation will continue. Nathan added quietly. So will the criminal review. Richard's face drained of color. Criminal. The word hung in the room. For the first time, he understood how serious the situation had become. Not career-ending. Life-changing. The meeting ended 15 minutes later. Richard left carrying a cardboard box. The image would remain forever in the minds of employees. The powerful director walking through the lobby alone. No assistance. No authority. No control. Just a man carrying the remains of his office. Employees watched silently. Some felt satisfaction. Some felt sadness. Most felt disbelief. Because institutions often convince people that powerful individuals are permanent. They rarely are. Power ends faster than anyone expects. Aurora stood near the nurse's station when Richard passed. For a moment their eyes met. Neither spoke. Richard looked older. Not because time had passed, because certainty had left him. The former director continued walking. The automatic doors opened, then closed behind him. Just like that, his chapter at St. Gabriel ended. The hospital exhaled. The following days moved quickly. Federal investigators expanded their review. Additional administrators became subjects of inquiry. Financial officers, department supervisors, outside contractors. The deeper investigators dug, the more problems they found. Not everyone was guilty. Most were not. But enough people had participated. Enough people had remained silent. Enough people had benefited. The system had allowed corruption to grow. Now the system was cleaning itself. Meanwhile, another process unfolded quietly. Aurora's records. Samuel Brooks arrived with additional documentation from Washington. Boxes. Actual boxes. Years of sealed files. Operational summaries. Personnel reviews. Medical commendations. Classified citations undergoing declassification. Nathan Walker helped organize the material. The major spent hours reviewing documents. Each file revealed another piece of the woman Aurora had once been. The picture surprised him, not because of her achievements, because of her consistency. Every review described similar traits. Reliable, calm under pressure, protective, self-sacrificing, difficult to intimidate, moderately stubborn. Samuel laughed when he read that part. Moderately, Nathan smiled. Seems optimistic. Aurora rolled her eyes. For the first time in weeks, normal conversation returned. Not because the past hurt less, because it no longer needed hiding. One afternoon, Samuel requested Aurora's presence in conference room B. She arrived expecting paperwork. Instead, she found several military officers waiting, including Nathan, Leah, Marcus Reed, Titan. The dog immediately crossed the room and sat beside her chair. Samuel smiled. Predictable. Aurora frowned. What is this? Samuel stood. The colonel looked unusually formal. That alone made Aurora nervous. Then he removed a small wooden presentation case. Her stomach dropped. No. Samuel ignored her. The room smiled. Apparently, everyone expected this reaction. Aurora Hayes. The colonel's voice became official. The old command voice. The one she remembered from briefings years ago. Several officers stood automatically, Marcus included. Aurora remained seated, mostly because her legs had forgotten how to function. Samuel opened the case. Inside rested medals. Several. Some familiar, some not. The room grew quiet. A number of awards and commendations remained sealed due to operational classification. Aurora closed her eyes. Samuel. No. The colonel smiled slightly. You've avoided this long enough. Marcus looked delighted. Nathan appeared fascinated. Leah looked openly amused. Titan simply watched Aurora. Samuel continued. Following review and authorization, these recognitions have now been restored. The words landed harder than Aurora expected. Restored. Not awarded. Restored. Because they had always belonged to her. She simply hadn't been allowed to keep them. Samuel presented the first medal. Then another. Then another. Each carried memories. Good memories. Terrible memories. Friends. Operations. Losses. Victories. Everything. Aurora accepted them silently. By the end, she was blinking rapidly. Marcus noticed. Pretended not to. A kindness among old soldiers. When the ceremony ended, nobody applauded immediately. The moment felt too personal. Too important. Finally, Nathan spoke. Congratulations. Aurora looked down at the medals. I don't know what to do with these. Marcus answered. Keep them. She laughed softly. Helpful. Titan placed his head against her leg. The room smiled. Even Samuel. The days continued passing. St. Gabriel slowly recovered. Employees relaxed. Patients noticed the difference. Departments communicated more openly. Fear disappeared from hallways. One evening, Aurora sat alone in the emergency department after shift. The waiting room was quiet. The lights were dim. Snow drifted beyond the windows. Danica Moore approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one over. Aurora accepted it. Thank you. Danica sat. For a while neither spoke. Then Danica smiled. You know something funny? What? I always knew you were hiding something. Aurora groaned. Danica laughed. Not military secrets. Good. I figured witness protection. Aurora nearly choked on her coffee. Danica looked pleased. I was wrong. Very. The charge nurse smiled. Then her expression softened. I'm glad you're still here. Aurora looked around the emergency department. The place felt different now. Familiar. Almost like home. A dangerous thought. Home implied permanence. Still, maybe, just maybe, the idea wasn't impossible anymore. Outside, the snow continued falling gently. Inside, St. Gabriel Medical Center kept moving forward. And for the first time in nearly a decade, Aurora Hayes no longer felt like a ghost hiding inside someone else's life. The woman she had been and the woman she had become were finally beginning to coexist. The past remained painful. The future remained uncertain. But her honor had been returned. And sometimes that was where healing truly began. A gentle snowfall drifted across Cedar Ridge 2 days later, covering rooftops, roads, and pine trees in fresh white powder. The town looked peaceful, the kind of peaceful that only comes after a long storm has finally exhausted itself. Inside St. Gabriel Medical Center, sunlight poured through the windows of the rehabilitation wing. For the first time in weeks, nobody was rushing. Nobody was arguing. Nobody was investigating. The tension that had gripped the hospital had begun to fade. Healing had finally returned. Marcus Reed stood beside the rehabilitation gym entrance wearing civilian clothes for the first time since arriving at the hospital. The 40-year-old former special operations soldier looked healthier every day. His beard had been trimmed. The color had returned to his face. The stiffness in his movements remained, but the worst of his injuries were behind him. Aurora stood beside Danica, more near the far wall. Nathan Walker and Leah Grant watched from nearby. Samuel Brooks remained quietly in the back of the room. Nobody had explained why everyone had gathered. Nobody needed to. The excitement belonged to one participant. Titan. The massive Belgian Malinois paced near the doorway, ears raised, tail moving restlessly. The dog already knew. Animals often sensed important moments before people did. Marcus knelt slowly despite his healing injuries. "Come here, partner." Titan froze. For half a second the entire room held its breath. Then the dog exploded forward. The force nearly knocked Marcus backward. Titan crashed into him, whining, barking, pressing his head against Marcus's chest, shoulders, neck, face, everywhere at once. Laughter filled the room. Several nurses wiped away tears. Even Leah smiled openly. Marcus wrapped both arms around the dog. For years they had survived together. For years they had protected each other. And for a terrible period of uncertainty, each had believed the other might be gone forever. Titan buried his face against Marcus's shoulder. Marcus laughed through wet eyes. "Easy, easy." The dog ignored him completely. The reunion continued for nearly a minute. Then something unexpected happened. Titan suddenly stopped. The dog turned, looked across the room. At Aurora. The room grew quiet again. Aurora stood motionless. Titan walked away from Marcus. Slowly, deliberately, he crossed the room, then sat beside Aurora, exactly where he had chosen to sit countless times before. One glance toward Marcus, one glance toward Aurora. Then he settled comfortably between them. The message required no translation. He belonged to both. Marcus smiled first. Samuel smiled second. Several nurses cried openly. Nathan shook his head. "That's unfair." Leah laughed. "What? He gets more emotional reactions than most humans." Danica nodded. "He's earned them." Aurora looked down. Titan rested one paw on her boot. The gesture hit harder than any military medal. Because medals recognized service. Trust recognized character. And trust could never be awarded. Only earned. Later that afternoon, the rehabilitation staff organized a small gathering in the hospital courtyard. Patients attended. Employees attended. Board members attended. Even several investigators remained. Not because they were required to. Because they wanted to. Eleanor Pierce stood near a temporary podium. The chairwoman looked stronger than she had during Richard Holloway's suspension hearing. Hope had returned to the hospital. That mattered to her. Eleanor tapped the microphone. The crowd quieted. "I won't keep everyone long." Several people laughed. Nobody believed board chairpersons capable of short speeches. Eleanor smiled. Recently, this hospital experienced difficult days. That was an understatement. But difficult days reveal important truths. She looked toward Aurora. Sometimes they reveal the people who quietly carry institutions when nobody is paying attention. Aurora immediately became uncomfortable. Nathan noticed. Marcus noticed. Titan noticed. The dog moved closer. Everyone smiled. Eleanor continued. St. Gabriel Medical Center exists to care for people. Somewhere along the way, some leaders forgot that mission. Her eyes briefly swept across the building behind them, but others never forgot. Several nurses applauded, Danica most enthusiastically. Aurora wished the ground would open. It refused. Eleanor smiled. Aurora Hayes reminded this hospital what service looks like. The applause grew louder. Aurora glanced toward Samuel. The colonel looked entirely too amused. Traitor. When the applause finally ended, Eleanor stepped away from the podium. The ceremony concluded, or so Aurora believed. Then Nathan Walker approached, carrying an envelope. She immediately became suspicious. No. Nathan smiled. I haven't even said anything. You have an envelope. Fair. He handed it over. Aurora opened it carefully, then froze. Inside sat an official employment offer. Emergency Department Director. St. Gabriel Medical Center. Aurora stared. The world seemed to pause. Danica nearly vibrated with excitement. Marcus looked delighted. Samuel folded his arms. Nathan watched quietly. Aurora looked up. This is a joke. Eleanor shook her head. No. Aurora looked back at the document. Department Director. Leadership. Responsibility. Visibility. Everything she had avoided for 8 years. No. Danica's face dropped. No. Aurora shook her head immediately. No. The answer came too quickly. Too automatically. Exactly as Samuel expected. The colonel stepped forward. Why? Aurora looked at him. You know why. I want to hear it. The crowd had mostly dispersed. Only friends remained. People who cared. That somehow made the conversation harder. Aurora looked down. Because people die. Silence followed. Nobody interrupted. She continued quietly. Leaders make decisions. Nobody spoke. Sometimes those decisions don't save everyone. Marcus lowered his eyes. Because he understood perfectly. Aurora swallowed. I was good at being a medic. The next words were harder. I don't know if I'm good at being responsible for everyone. Samuel walked closer. The older man looked more fatherly than military now. Aurora. She met his eyes. Do you know why Shadow Phoenix trusted you? She said nothing. Samuel answered anyway. Because you cared. The courtyard remained silent. Samuel continued. You never stopped caring. Marcus nodded. Nathan nodded. Even Danica nodded. The evidence surrounded her. Patients. Nurses. Titan. Marcus. Everyone she had helped. Everyone she had protected. Aurora looked down at the offer again. The fear remained. But something else existed now too. Hope. Several months passed. Spring arrived. The snow disappeared. Pine forests turned green again. Flowers returned to Cedar Ridge. Life moved forward. Inside St. Gabriel Medical Center, change continued. New leadership replaced old leadership. Policies improved. Transparency increased. Staff morale recovered. Patient satisfaction improved. The hospital slowly became the place it should have been all along. On a warm May morning, Aurora Hayes walked through the emergency department wearing a white director's coat. Employees greeted her. Patients thanked her. New nurses asked questions. The title still felt strange. Emergency Department Director. Sometimes she checked the badge simply to confirm it was real. Danica walked beside her. You've stopped trying to resign. Aurora sighed. I submitted 3 resignation letters. 4. Danica smiled. I rejected them all. Aurora laughed. The sound felt lighter now. Easier. At the far end of the department, Titan rested beside a chair while Marcus completed paperwork for a veterans outreach program. The dog lifted his head. Immediately spotted Aurora. Immediately stood. Marcus groaned. Oh, come on. Titan ignored him. The dog crossed the room. Then sat beside Aurora. Exactly where he always chose to sit. The staff laughed. Marcus pointed accusingly. Traitor. Titan wagged his tail. Not even slightly sorry. Aurora scratched behind the dog's ear. The familiar scar remained beneath her fingers. The same scar. The same dog. A different life. Months earlier she had considered leaving Cedar Ridge. Returning to anonymity. Running again. Instead she stayed. Because healing wasn't always about escaping the past. Sometimes healing meant building something better from it. Aurora looked around the emergency department. At the nurses. The patients. The doctors. The friends she never expected to make. At Marcus. At Nathan. At Danica. At Titan. For years she had believed her story ended in the desert. Then she believed it ended when she disappeared. She had been wrong both times. Some endings were actually beginnings wearing different clothes. Outside, sunlight streamed through the hospital windows. Inside, St. Gabriel Medical Center continued saving lives. And in the middle of it all stood Aurora Hayes. Not a ghost, not a classified file, not a forgotten soldier. Simply a woman who had finally found a place worth staying. And this time, she wasn't planning to leave. Sometimes God's greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder from heaven or signs written across the sky. Sometimes they arrive quietly, through ordinary people who choose compassion when fear would be easier, courage when silence would be safer, and kindness when no one is watching. Aurora Hayes never set out to become a hero. She wasn't looking for recognition, medals, or a second chance to relive her past. She simply chose to help when a frightened military dog needed someone he could trust. What began as a single moment in a hospital corridor became something far greater. Hidden truths were revealed. Corruption was exposed. Honor was restored. Old wounds began to heal. And through it all, a loyal dog named Titan reminded everyone that love, loyalty, and trust are gifts that time can never erase. In our daily lives, most of us will never uncover secret investigations, serve in special operations units, or face the extraordinary challenges Aurora faced. But every day we encounter smaller choices that matter just as much. We choose whether to help someone who is struggling, whether to tell the truth when it is difficult, whether to show compassion when others look away, and whether to remain faithful when life feels unfair. Those choices may seem small in the moment, but God often uses small acts of obedience to create miracles we cannot yet see. This story reminds us that God never wastes our pain. The struggles we endure, the losses we carry, and the battles we survive can one day become the very tools He uses to help someone else. What feels like the end of a chapter may simply be the beginning of a greater purpose that we cannot yet understand. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need encouragement today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from or what part of the story moved you the most. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories of faith, hope, courage, and the extraordinary ways God works through ordinary people. May God bless you and your family with peace during difficult times, strength when challenges arise, wisdom in every decision, and hope for every tomorrow. May His love guide your steps, protect your loved ones, and remind you that you are never walking alone. Amen. Folded hands, red heart.